Hello everyone, this is Al Fadi. Thank you so much for joining me again in another video of this fabulous series about Islam and atheism. And in the past few videos, myself and Dr. David Wood, we covered a number of examples when it comes to how, for instance, ex-Muslims who declare themselves to be atheists because of the fact that they were troubled, for instance, by the morality of the Prophet of Islam, how can they basically navigate through or even justify making decisions based on moral actions when in fact atheism tends to try to deny the existence of any morality or moral power, if you wish, or a greater moral giver. And in this case, of course, Muslims, a lot of the youngsters lately who are disturbed by what Islam teaches, specifically by the actions of the founder of Islam, they tend to gravitate away from the faith. As I said, with me here is Dr. David Wood, who's been unpacking a number of those issues, and today is no exception. We are going to talk about yet another tough topic related to the morality of Muhammad and some of his teachings that are still applicable till this day. David, welcome back.
Good to be here, sir.
So what are we going to talk about today in relationship to Muhammad's morality and how that applies, of course, to those who declare themselves to be atheists?
Muta.
Muta. Okay,
You heard
so
of this?
that's a temporary marriage.
You heard of this?
Right. Yeah.
Did you hear about that in Saudi Arabia?
You know, you hear about it, but as you know, Sunnis tend to try to distance themselves from that, and they claim that it's the Shia.
Yep.
And they also will say, well, it was abrogated, in other words, canceled. But, the puzzling thing is still there in the Quran and in the Hadith, of course.
Yeah. And yeah, one of the things you find is that whenever there is a country in distress where you end up having a lot of poor people in war-torn areas, a lot of the rich, wealthy sheikhs from Saudi Arabia start showing up, right?
Yeah.
And they start hiring these 11, 12, 13-year-old girls for muta marriage. So just in case everyone is new to this, in Islam, situations arose where, talking about the early history of Islam, when Muhammad's around, situations arose where Muslims were, off campaigning and fighting wars, and they were away from their wives, and they came to Muhammad and said, "Hey, what are we going to do? Or should we castrate ourselves? We're away from our wives. We're losing our minds here." And Muhammad allowed them to do what's called muta, or temporary marriage. So temporary marriage is it's just prostitution, but you might call it halal prostitution, right?
Yeah, and I want to say the word in Arabic, muta, means pleasure. I mean, if that tells you anything. Yeah.
So, the temporary marriage is if you want to have sex with a prostitute, you just pay that woman to marry you for an hour or a few hours or a day or a few days or something like that, whatever you guys agree to in the contract. So you pay her, she marries you for the time that you want to have pleasure with her, and then everything's okay with Allah. So notice it's the same thing as prostitution. You just get married for the duration of that, and then everything's fine.
Sounds like a legalized prostitution.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So, here's the situation. In the Muslim sources, Shias still allow muta marriage, and you find this happening all the time in Shia areas. But Sunnis, in the Sunni sources, there's a bit of inconsistency. Some of the Sunni sources, in their top sources, their top sources are inconsistent. Some of the sources say that, all the sources agree that Muhammad allowed it for a while.
That's right.
Some of the sources say that Muhammad eventually forbade the practice. He eventually said, no more muta. But other passages in those same sources say, no, it wasn't Muhammad who forbade the practice. It was one of the caliphs, and then basically people started saying that Muhammad forbade it in order to do away with it. Let's look at one passage from Sahih al-Bukhari. This is Sahih al-Bukhari 5075. We used to participate in the holy battles led by Allah's messenger, and we had nothing, no wives with us. So we said, shall we get ourselves castrated? He forbade us that, and then allowed us to marry a woman temporarily by giving her even a garment And then he recited to us, O you who believe, make not unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful for you. And this kind of this passage kind of makes it difficult for people to say decisively that Muhammad forbade muta, because basically if you have some passages in the hadith saying that Muhammad eventually forbade muta, but you have other passages saying, no, it wasn't Muhammad, it was one of the later caliphs. Well, Muhammad specifically says in this hadith, when he was allowing muta, don't forbid yourself what God has allowed.
Right.
And he's talking specifically about muta, which would mean that one of the later caliphs would have no right to say, hey, you can't do that anymore.
And the context, David, is like, he's talking about, at worst, at best case scenario, he's talking about sleeping, with women.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say, well, marriage in this case, because it's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no commitment here in terms of a real long-term marriage, technically speaking. So he's justifying to these men how they can satisfy their basically sexual desires.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the moral issue that we wanted to draw attention to. One, it's prostitution, which here is, what are they actually doing? They're saying, hey, I want to rent your body. I want to rent your body for a few hours to satisfy myself sexually using your body, and I'm going to give you something. And in the passage we just read, he said we would give her a garment, right? So, hey, we have the spoils of war, something like that. We got an extra coat laying around. Hey, I'll give you this coat to be my wife for the next 2 days. And I'm going to have a bunch of sex with you, and then I'm going to give you the coat in exchange. We have other Muslim sources that say they would give her like a handful of flour, so you'd be able to bake yourself a loaf of bread. That's what your body is worth to me. I'm going to use your body, and I'm going to give you enough for a loaf of bread. And so this was perfectly acceptable. So there's no disagreement that Muhammad allowed his followers to hire prostitutes for this temporary marriage practice. The only disagreement is whether he was the one who forbade it or one of the later caliphs forbade it, and then the Shias don't even have that problem.
That's right.
They still allow it. So notice what this does is, if you want to practice muta, if a Muslim in Saudi Arabia, if a Muslim sheikh in Saudi Arabia wants to practice muta, he can just say, nope, I've got all these hadiths right here that say it wasn't Muhammad, it was one of the later caliphs who did it, and so I'm going to believe these. And Muhammad himself used the Quran to say, don't allow anyone to forbid you what Allah has allowed, and so I'm going to keep practicing muta. I'm going to believe these hadiths. And if you find the practice reprehensible, then you could go to the hadiths that say Muhammad forbade it, and you say, oh, okay, so maybe he allowed it for a little period of time, but then he eventually forbade it. Which, I mean, gosh, why are you allowing it for for a while, right?
Exactly. I mean, what's the point? Is it just for that battle only? How come it didn't specifically say that?
Yeah, and I mean, think about the reason a Muslim would say, oh, it was just allowed for a short period of time. You could say, well, things were so bad right there that Muhammad had to allow it. Well, how is that different from any other later wars after Muhammad? So why would that not be a practice that continues? But the moral issue here is, again, that Muhammad was allowing his followers to pay women to use the woman's body, not for any sort of long-term commitment, but just to satisfy themselves, and then paying the woman for the use of their bodies. Now,
are you saying there's no, treatment, woman rights and equality and things like that? I mean, I wonder where the Me Too movement in all of this.
Yeah, so I don't know what their position would be, but we would find it morally reprehensible to be doing that, to be treating women in that way. You're objects for us to pay for sex. Now, so here's the issue. This is one of the issues that would bother lots of Muslims when they think of their prophet being this holy man of God. And your average Muslim has never, your average Sunni Muslim has never heard of this, except in the context of, there was some early practice or something like that now no longer exists. But it's something they need to think about. And if a Muslim is thinking, really, is my prophet allowed men to have sex with prostitutes just by giving them something and then saying, oh, well, I'm going to be married. I'm going to be married for the next 3 hours. it looks like he's just using theology to justify all the same practices that people wanted to do anyway, right? It's you know, if you look at what people do during that time, you know, they're going around, they're fighting, they're taking sex captives, they're hiring, you know, you could hire prostitutes, they're doing all these things. And Islam just comes along and says, hey, we're going to do all the same things, but we're just going to say Allah, you know, Allah's cool with it. And we're kind of going to come up with ways to do the exact same things, but Allah's going to be happy with it. And so lots of Muslims will look at this and go, there's something very suspicious here, that Muhammad's getting all these revelations that justify all the basest, lowest desires of human beings, and say, here's how Allah.
Isn't what Aisha told him also?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Your God is quick to satisfy your desires,
yeah.
basically.
So, one of the greatest comments of Aisha ever. Yeah. In fact, that should be a video, like Aisha's best burns, like number one would be.
We should do this.
Yeah, number one would be I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women.
That's right. That was a powerful one too.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about a video. All right, back to this one. So anyway, you have this problem. You have this problem that Islam is allowing prostitution here, and lots of Muslims would look at this and say, "Is this really the greatest moral example of all time? Is this really the pattern of conduct that we should be following?" And so they can't trust Muhammad anymore because he keeps doing these kinds of things, and then so they leave Islam. But as we pointed out, a lot of people who leave Islam become atheists. And here, once again, if you become an atheist, what happens to your moral objections to Muhammad? If you become an atheist, what happens to your moral objections? What we find is that people will become atheists and still have their moral objections to Muhammad. They'll still say, I condemn Muhammad for these things that he did. I condemn Muhammad for allowing his followers to use women's bodies in this way. And so they'll continue condemning it, not realizing that their new ideology completely undermines the reliability of any moral claims they have. Because if you were an atheist and you took it seriously, you'd have to say, hey, what's the foundation of my belief? What's the foundation of my belief that it's wrong to use a woman in that way? Well, you could say you're kind of, you know, human beings have a kind of herd instinct that's wired into us, that people tend to want to help other people who are in need or something like that. I don't even think that would apply in this situation. Herd instinct doesn't have a lot to do with a financial transaction between a man and a woman for sex. So I think all you could do as an atheist is say, well, I just come from a society now where that's frowned upon, where we don't do that anymore, where we view women more highly than them. And so it's just my society. But if that's your only basis, then you'd have to say, okay, my society teaches that you shouldn't treat women in that way. Muhammad came from a different society, so whose society is correct? Well, there's nothing in atheism that would allow you to say, well, this one is better than that one, or this one has a superior morality than that one. And so once again, the issue comes back to haunt atheists, that we look at this, we look at all of these moral problems with Muhammad, all of these things that he's doing, and we look at them and we say, these are wrong. These things are wrong. They're clearly wrong. And lots of atheists would agree with us and say, yes, these things are wrong. The problem is atheism doesn't allow them to be those things to be really, really wrong. Atheism will allow you to not like it. Atheism would allow you to say, well, this doesn't agree with my current beliefs or something like that. But it doesn't allow you to say this is actually really morally wrong. All you can say is you just don't like it. And so Muhammad allowing his followers to hire prostitutes turns out not to just be a problem for Muslims, who claim that he's the greatest moral example who's ever lived. Turns out to be a problem for atheists as well, who have now no basis for even condemning the behavior. So problem either way.
Right. So you can see, why these examples that we're doing are so powerful. And the way we're doing it, by the way, just to give you an idea, is we're doing one problem per video, because we want to just dedicate that video just to that one specific problem. And it helps you also in your search. If you're looking for instance, muta marriage or temporary marriage, you'll find a video like this. If you're talking about wife beating, like we discussed it earlier, you'll find a video about that. So this is how we're going to be doing it. And in the next video, of course, we'll have yet another moral dilemma for those ex-Muslims who want to declare themselves to be atheists. Our hope is that they will pay attention to these kind of tensions that we're raising here, and hope that they will turn their attention back to Christ. Muhammad was a sinner, And all of us are sinners and in need of a Savior. Muhammad missed out on that opportunity. You still have that chance. Thank you, brother. And I can't wait, of course, for the next, moral, or in this case, immoral example by the founder of Islam.
Zainab.
Yeah, there you go. That's the hint right there. Thank you so much. Till we meet again, have a blessed day. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We can't make these quality videos without the help of partners like you. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter today at patreon.com/Sira International. I want to make sure you always get notified when we release a new video. So please click the bell to be notified, and of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel. If this video was helpful to you, please click the thumbs up. Thank you.